Happy Easter, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Richard Moore. I'm going to do an audio cast today because I want to take a few minutes and pay tribute to three very dear friends of mine, friends who no longer inhabit this earth, who were taken too soon, but whose lives left a rich legacy all around them, and going beyond the people that they knew and loved. They certainly had a great impact on my life, and I want to share their wisdom and a touch of their lives with you this morning. A few housekeeping details first. Yesterday, I sent out a notice that, unfortunately, subscription prices will be rising monthly, $7 and to $70 annually on May 15th. It's a necessary thing. We've got a bunch of new subscribers coming in, and I appreciate all of you for supporting this enterprise. And for those of you who have and are supporting it, or who will do so by May 15th, if you sign up for an annual subscription plan, you will lock in this rate of $55 a year forever. And on top of that, you'll get 15% more off for the coming year. That's a thank you for helping this project thrive. But we're having growing pains. I'm planning a podcast. This is going to be a fun podcast. It's not just going to be me yammering away. It's going to be a great guest. We're going to have great co-hosts. And I can't really talk about that. I will soon. But it's going to take some better equipment than what I have right now. Also, there are just so many stories out there that I'm not getting to. Investigative stories, matters that need to be investigated, community stories that need to be told. And so I'm going to be hiring a reporter to help with that because I just can't get to all of them. So anyway, thanks. That subscription price, you have a button there to get the 15% off if you subscribe by May 15th when the prices go up. And I do appreciate all the readers out there and listeners in this case. I'm going to take just about 3 or 4 minutes and talk about one of those stories that I just can't get to. And that is the politics of journalism itself. I've been meaning to write this for a few weeks. It's not going to happen, so I'm going to talk about it. I had several weeks ago the occasion to go, as I mentioned on the Substack, to the Wisconsin Newspaper Association convention. And I was both inspired and deflated by that experience. I was inspired because the journalists who were there were passionate and eager and obviously talented and hungry to go out and explore the truth and tell the stories of their communities. But the fact is that the convention itself was about half the size that it used to be. Newspapers are disappearing. We all know that. Local newspapers are disappearing. I think the number is, I don't have it off the top of my head, but I think some 2,000 local newspapers have disappeared across the American landscape in the last decade or so. And it's not just that newspapers are disappearing. Even the newspapers that survive, like the one I write for, the Lakeland Times, we're thriving, but it's hard to find writers. It's hard to find writers who can do the job and are eager to do the job and tell the truth. So the ranks of journalists themselves are thinning. And so it's no surprise that you go to the WNA and the topic of the day is how do we resurrect and revive the local newspaper industry. And so the keynote speaker was a guy by the name of Steve Waldman, and he has a group called Rebuild Local News. I think you can find that under that name on the internet. And the starting point for Waldman and for actually anybody else who gets into this discussion about how do we save the local newspaper industry, it's always, well, the government has to step in, the government has to subsidize. Now, in the past, this has been driven by the George Soros left. They really want the government to directly give newsrooms loads of cash to, quote unquote, so democracy can thrive. The problem with that approach, of course, is if you have all these local newspapers springing up or surviving based on government handouts, you're going to have little NPRs all across the American landscape. That's just a given. You're not going to bite the hand that feeds you. You're going to spout the government narrative just like NPR does today. Now, Waldman's approach was, as he spoke to the WNA, was different, and it's a breath of fresh air. So he says the subsidies his mind, he understands that you can't have subsidies go directly to newsrooms in a way that's going to allow the government to control the content. So his group has come up with any number of ways to restructure those subsidies so that doesn't happen. And actually, some of those ideas are not half bad. For instance, one is he points out that the federal government alone spends $1 billion a year or more advertising. They advertise everything. They advertise, go get your food stamps, go register to vote, go get your vaccines. We all hear those. And they distribute this money out. It's tons of what amounts to subsidies. Now, he looked at those subsidies in the New York area, and what he found was that 85 to 90% of them went to large corporate enterprises like the New York Times, for instance, and the other legacy newspapers. At the same time, he pointed out, there are, like, in that same area, 200 community newspapers who were getting nothing or just a little bit. So the idea is you don't have to spend more money. This doesn't affect how much taxpayer money is being spent, but that you compel the government to distribute those revenues, those advertising dollars, more equitably. That's not a bad idea, though I'm skeptical of what happens when government is forced to subsidize newspapers that it doesn't want to subsidize. They'll just ask for ever larger budgets, and no doubt they'll get it given the Congresses that we have. But it nonetheless is a novel way to approach it. Now, the better idea in Wallman's mind, and this is something that is circulating in Wisconsin, and it is in the Wisconsin legislature, is that actually the subsidy would not go to the newspaper at all. But the subsidy would be a tax credit that would go to a business, primarily a small business, you would think, in a small town, that advertises in a local newspaper. So it's a win-win situation. Nobody's going to advertise in a newspaper just because of a tax credit. So the newspaper still has to go out and earn the advertising dollar. But by the same token, this incentive helps newspapers. It helps the business because they get the subsidy, they get the tax credit, and it helps the newspaper because they get more advertising. Now, again, the very basic problem with all of these schemes is that it amounts to government subsidies, and there are always unintentional outcomes, consequences. When you give a tax break or you give a tax credit to someone, you're picking winners and losers. That's the very definition of a government subsidy. So what happens if the government subsidy goes to this local newspaper, which is the only newspaper in town, but it happens to be corrupt? There are a lot of examples of that very thing, where the local newspaper is owned by a local person who is part and parcel of the good old boy establishment, who doesn't want any reporting on what it does in government. So at that point, the subsidy then begins to strengthen the newspaper that really isn't a newspaper, but just a shield for the good old boy establishment. Now, you might think, you say, well, you know what, there is no startup. You're not suppressing any startups. There are no challenges to those newspapers. But that's not the case. There are a lot of them out there, and a lot of them just have online presences. Here, I'm in South Carolina right now, and we have over in these neighboring counties, you had a number of counties where the newspaper just collapsed and folded, and you have a number of these counties where they're part and parcel of the good old boy establishment. And so these citizens went out when they saw their tax bills and they saw what their government was up to. They went out and they used online resources and they trained themselves to become citizen journalists. And so they would cover town meetings and community events, and they called themselves the concerned citizens of Bamberg County, the concerned citizens of Hampton County. And they essentially became online newspapers. But would they qualify? They attract very little to no advertising. Would they qualify for a tax credit? Who would be calling the shots? Who would be defining what a tax credit is or what an eligible newspaper is to get the credit if you're a business advertising with that newspaper? It's going to be unelected bureaucrats that are deciding that. So I think the idea is that we can't defeat the disease that is the failing local newspapers by doing the very same thing that caused those failures in the first place. And by that, I mean, a lot of people think that the internet killed local newspapers, and that's not the case at all. Many local newspapers have thrived because they have established online presence and they have picked up new readers. And they might not get a lot of advertising dollars, but they get a lot of readers who many of whom migrate over and subscribe to the newspaper. It hasn't been the internet that's killed it. It's been the billions and billions of dollars that go to these gigantic legacy media outlets. That's what killed the newspaper industry. We talked about the advertising. I talked about the advertising, the $1 billion in revenues that they spend. Those are subsidies. But there are also federal tax breaks. There are postal rate tax breaks that amount to billions more. And 95% of it goes to the legacy media. 95% of it goes to corporate enterprises. And they have turned around and fueled the growth of those corporate enterprises into communities and killed local newspapers. Gannett by itself has killed hundreds and hundreds of local newspapers, reaching out, going into communities, killing or swallowing up those newspapers, and then killing content. If we cut the snake of the head off, if we cut the subsidies rather than creating new subsidies, those tentacles will retract. There will be a void, perhaps in many communities, but there already is. There will also be startups and citizens and thriving, concerned citizens who will create new newspapers. And I think that's the future of the newspaper industry. So that's my 2 cents worth on efforts to revive the local newspaper industry. It'll be interesting to watch what happens over the coming years. Now I want to turn to my friends because they speak to this very same issue, community. And I want to start, my first tribute would be to my good and dear friend, David Smith. When I was in college, David Smith was, by then, out of college. He was 8 years older than me. I got into politics. I was very passionate about politics. I was driven first by Bobby Kennedy's 1968 campaign. And I got into local politics, and there I met David. David was already a seasoned veteran. I came at politics a little bit differently than David did. We were both very well-read, but my experience in politics was all about books and theory and policy and politics. And David, although he was very well-read too, his approach was different. His approach was pounding the pavement. His approach was going to town meetings and community events and taking the pulse of the people. And he would go over and over to those meetings, different places, to see how national issues were impacting local people and what they felt about them. And he always warned me. He said, Richard, never let these national issues, as important as national issues are, never let them become nationalized. Always seek out the local angle. See what people feel about those issues. It was a very, very big lesson for me. And he taught me these skills, and I went to these meetings, and I learned that that's where democracy happens, at the town meeting, at the local level. And I learned those skills to be able to then translate that back to my book learning and policy in later years. And when I got into investigative journalism, those very skills helped me to be a good investigative journalist, or at least as good as I am. And I have David to thank for that, because he was dedicated to the cause of community. And that's what it was all about for him. So one night, I'm sitting around and I get a call from David. And he said, Richard, I have something very important to tell you. I'm dying. And I said, man, you better be dying if you're calling to tell me that. And he said, well, that's what I'm calling to tell you. I'm dying. And I didn't believe it. Kind of feel bad about it now. But he finally convinced me that he was, in fact, dying of pancreatic cancer. And he invited me down to visit with his family. We often, in our younger years, we would hang out in a little town called Pinehurst, North Carolina. It's a beautiful town. It's small. And we used to hang out there and get away from politics and go up for the weekend and have parties. And so David, for his final days on this earth, wanted to spend those days in Pinehurst. And he and his wife, Louise, and the kids rented a house there. And he invited me down, and I went down. And by this time, David was very weak, and it was not much more that he would be able to go out. But we went out to some of the old hangouts, to some of the old haunts, and we had a good time. And During one of the very end, at the end of my visit, when it was clear that David was no longer going to be able to be out and about and was headed to hospice, he was sitting there reading the newspaper. And he said, "I've got one more request where we should go." And I said, "Well, what's that?" He said, "I want to go to the town meeting. I want to go to the Pinehurst town meeting. I'm reading here that they have a big controversy over a government building, and the people are going to be expressing their views one way or another." And I'm like, dude, you're dying. Do you really want to go to another town hall meeting?" But that's exactly where he wanted to go. And so Louise and myself and David, off we went to the Pinehurst town meeting, and they had quite the brouhaha at that town hall meeting, and it was very, very well attended. And it was the life of democracy. And David enjoyed every minute of it, as I did, although I think in the end they made the wrong decision, but that's just me. But anyway, it taught me something as I said goodbye to David for the last time. It taught me I saw a man who was dedicated to the cause of community to the very end. And I have tried to keep that front and center in my philosophy as I pursue my investigative journalism, to seek out the community, to seek out the people. Those are the stories that make the issues what they are. Melanie Kirsch, I met in the Northwoods of Wisconsin. Melanie was born and raised in Rhinelander, Wisconsin, but she set sail for California, and she did very well there. She became a rep for the Stars. She got married to a photographer. They had children. And over time, she felt that she just did not want to raise her children in L.A., so back to Rhinelander she came. And that's where our lives intersected, in politics. Now, we became fast friends, and in fact, when I ran for the assembly way back when, she was my campaign manager, and she was a very good campaign manager. We lost the election, but it wasn't because of her. But her legacy has nothing to do with me or with my campaign. Her legacy has to do with the larger movement that we were both involved in, but she was much more a leader, and that was an effort to fight a massive sulfide mine that they were planning for northern Wisconsin. It would have destroyed and plundered the Northwoods. It was an unsafe mine. It would have bankrupted the properties, hundreds of properties around the mining site. It would have destroyed their well water. They couldn't get rid of the wastewater, so they planned to take a pipeline and pump it through 20 towns of northern Wisconsin, all the way from Forest County to the Wisconsin River. There was a huge outcry and coalition and mass movement against this mine, and it had many leaders. It was very diverse ideologically from left to right, but at the center of it was Melanie Kirsch. She was the hurricane force. She was the beating heart of the movement. And why that movement succeeded was because everybody was squabbling, because they were all so diverse. She kept everybody focused on the mission. The mission was action to stop the mine. Shut up and quit your squabbling, and let's get down to the business of stopping this mine. That was her message. And she worked day and night with her fax machine and her phone in the other hand, and she brought everybody together, and she gave it the unity to defeat powerful corporations like Exxon and shut down that mine forever. And she taught me that it wasn't enough to be just dedicated to the cause. You had to be committed to the mission. And that was very important too. You had to act, and you had to stay focused on the mission. And I will always take that away. And when people go to the Northwoods today, and they awe and wonder and are inspired by its beauty and its pristine natural resources, when you do that, thank Melanie Kirsch, because she helped preserve what it is today. And finally, Mary Kinnunen. Mary Kinnunen was also from Rhinelander. She was a bright young star in the Democratic Party. She won a city council seat and then won to be mayor of Rhinelander. And the state, she was a quieter person than Melanie Kirsch, but she was a power in her own right. And she was viewed by the state Democratic Party as a woman who could one day be a statewide candidate. And she became mayor, and she created some she made some real bad rookie mistakes. She could have easily deflected those mistakes. They were pretty big fiscally for the city of Rhinelander. She could have deflected it. She could have spun it. She could have saved a career. But she didn't. She stood up and she said, I'm responsible for this. I made these mistakes and I'm sorry, but that's the truth. Mary Kinnunen was perhaps the most honest person I know, and that's hard to survive when you're that honest in politics and increasingly in journalism. But Mary Kinnunen was that, and she taught me very much that a life of honesty is a life of dignity. She lost the next election, and she told me the next day, I came up short last night, but I came up long on doing the right thing, and how right she was. We lost Mary in her 50s to Lou Gehrig's disease, way too young, ALS. And then, of course, Melanie, I didn't mention, but she was also in her 50s, lost to breast cancer. I miss all three of these people dearly, very much so. We live in perilous times. Everybody knows that. We are divided. It's hostile. It's polarized. And I think today, more than anything, we need people like David Smith and Melanie Kirsch and Mary Kinnunen. Whether it's politics or in journalism, we need people like these involved who are dedicated to the cause and who are committed to the mission, who are honest people who will get in and roll up their sleeves and do what it takes to bring our country together again, to give our communities voice again. That's what we need now more than ever. Before she died, Mary Kinnunen said she had a revelation. It was one of the most amazing things that she recognized at the end of her life. And it was simply this. It was that I'm amazed at how fast it all went by. I'm amazed how quickly life by. I have tried to think about that every day since then, how quickly life goes by. We wake up, it's Monday, it's the weekend, the month is gone, the year is gone. We need people like these three who are dedicated to the cause, who are committed to the mission, and plunged in to tell truth and give truth to power. But we also need every one of us to think on a daily basis and to remind ourselves, as Mary would have reminded us, how quickly time goes by, how quickly life slips away. We can't grab it by the shirt tail and pull it back. And so as we go about the business, whether it's our politics or our journalism, as we go about the business of the cause of the community and staying to the mission, take time each day to think about how quickly life is going by. Take a pause to love and be loved by the people around you and enjoy the moment. Because, my friends, that love and those people around you are the most important mission of all. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. I hope you have a great week. I'll be back with more stories tomorrow.